Hello friend. I want to tell you about the Mercedes-Benz E-Class W211 car. Like every E-Class, spacious, comfortable and modern. In the case of this generation, we can talk about the biggest technological leap compared to its predecessor. We can say that from today's point of view, the W211 generation is the first modern one in this line. A car that you can now get into and not feel like you're in a historical model, like the W210. Much depends on the configuration of a given model, but the vast majority of cars have good equipment and materials, are comfortable. In terms of safety, if the car is not corroded, you can't fault it for anything. In 2006, it was the safest model in its class. It was the first car in the world to have adaptive headlights. The equipment list includes 4-zone air conditioning, adaptive cruise control and an electrically opening tailgate. A car is a pleasure to travel in if it is fully functional. It has good driving characteristics, high suspension comfort and usually dynamic engines. A big advantage is the spacious interior, and in the estate car a huge, 690-liter boot and a very refined interior management system. Technology classically for larger Mercedes models, the E-Class has a longitudinally mounted engine and rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, 4MODIC, with a traditional differential. The front and rear suspension is multi-link. 4 wishbones made of aluminum are used at the front, and 5 at the rear. The Airmatic pneumatic system uses bellows that regulate the vehicle's height depending on load and speed. The damping force of the shock absorbers is also regulated, in a way that is so precise that the computer can control compression and rebound separately. The steering system is hydraulically assisted, has variable power steering and variable ratio, and the braking system in pre-facelift cars is electro-hydraulically controlled, SBC. Thanks to this, the E-Class has entered a new level of technological advancement in the field of electronic skid control and stabilization systems. Mercedes-Benz Class engines. The list of engines for this model, as with many Mercedes from years ago, is very long. The model designations are also important, as they almost directly indicate what engine we are dealing with. Instead of presenting the engine versions in the traditional way, we will start with a list of designations with a short description of the engine. In the above list, the term Florida refers to the version after the facelift, i.e. from 2006. The exception to the rule is the E300 CDI model, which went on sale only in 2008. It was the only variant of this car with a diesel engine that met the requirements of the Euro 5 standard, but it was not homologate for it, so the documents contain information about Euro 4. Euro 5 was only in force from September 2009. Versions without the Florida designation were offered until 2006, although some longer, but these are designated Florida. The 4MODIC designation in brackets indicates that the engine variant was optionally offered with 4-wheel drive. If the car does not have a 6-speed manual gearbox, it has either a 5-speed automatic or, since 2004, a 7-speed automatic. Mercedes-Benz W211. Which engine to choose? The choice of engines and versions of this car is so large that you can adjust it to your preferences, needs and financial possibilities. The rule is simple: the larger the engine and more cylinders, the higher the maintenance costs. The same applies to petrol and diesel engines. However, in the case of diesel engines, the costs are potentially much higher than in petrol equivalents. Almost any drive unit is sufficient for this model. Mercedes has saved on power only in the basic versions of diesels, especially the taxi version with 102 horsepower. It is better not to buy it. However, the E220 CDI model has at least adequate performance. The choice of 4-cylinder engines is small, but even the facelifted E200 compressor with 184 HP is already a car that drives quite briskly and burns the least of the petrol engines. This is the golden mean between costs and dynamics. Both before and after the facelift, it is almost the same, very successful design, which only requires frequent oil changes, checking for leaks and checking the condition of the timing chain. High work culture and good performance are provided by V6 engines, and even better by V8. You shouldn't be afraid of them. You just have to be aware of the design. 2 rows of cylinders, 2 heads. The naturally aspirated units from the M112 and M113 families are closely related, offered only before the facelift and very durable. Maintained in good condition, they make the greatest mileage of all engines in this model, and they can easily handle driving on LPG. Such a conversion is a very good alternative to powerful diesels, which burn a few liters per 100 kilometers less, but much more expensive fuel. The M272 and M273 equivalents introduced after the facelift should be viewed completely differently. These were no longer as successful, and they struggled mainly with the timing drive. The chain timing often had to be replaced after less than 100,000 kilometers. Even if the timing did not kill these units, they killed themselves due to faulty cylinder liners, cylinder bearing wear, rotating bearing shells, or a fault in the intake manifold control. Repaired and improved in time, they could still serve for a long time. Nevertheless, when buying these engines, you should approach them with a great deal of caution and expect a possible replacement, because the costs of repairs are huge today. Among the V6 engines, one stands out in the E350 CGI model. It develops the highest power, but has direct petrol injection. This is actually the only significant difference from the other M272 variants, but it is worth knowing about it when buying a car with LPG power in mind. In particular, diesel engines, popular in its time, are worthy of interest in this model, although today, unfortunately, the vast majority have huge mileages, often literally worn out. The 4-cylinder 2.1-liter Ohm 646 engine found its way under the hood of many Mercedes and has various, extreme opinions. The general problem of this unit is the failure of the intake manifold and injection system, but it is not a bad engine. Properly operated or repaired, it will travel 1,000,000 kilometers. However, if you care about durability and record mileage, the only right choice is the inline 5 or 6-cylinder Ohm 647 and Ohm 648. These units were offered only until the facelift, and the R6 engine only until 2005. They are simple, extremely durable, and almost failure-free, sensitive injection system. Interestingly, despite the difference in capacity and number of cylinders, they develop the same power of 177 HP in models marked as E270 and E280. Only in the E320 CDI variant was it a higher power of 204 HP. The successor, since 2005, to the very successful inline units is the 3-liter V6 Ohm 642. They are good, but not as successful and, above all, they have serious failures, such as rotating bearing shells or intake manifold failures. The oil pump fails quite often. The durability of the injection system also leaves something to be desired. The V8 Ohm 628 and M629 engines were at the top of the diesel spectrum. Even if they were successful, it's not really worth buying because of the fuel consumption, which is already close to 10 L 100 kilometers, and the performance is not much better than the more powerful V6 diesel versions. This engine made sense when new, mainly because of the car's prestige and range, and now it can be treated as something extra. Due to the relatively low popularity of this engine, it's hard to get reliable information about its durability. Mercedes-Benz W211 typical faults. I will start unusually with a summary. The Mercedes E-Class, as a car of a higher class and very modern in its time, is still an above-average durable and usually trouble-free car, if it is not worn out. In the case of this model, it is really worth buying a nicely maintained copy, even for a 30 to 40% higher price. The lower the mileage, provided it is real, the much better for the next owner. The most worrying thing about this car is the braking system and the SBC system. Even the manufacturer itself admitted that this solution was unsuccessful and withdrew it with the facelift. In short, it is about full and, above all, independent control of the braking system by a computer. The brake pedal is purely electronic and not mechanically connected to the system. The system was supposed to read the threat and the driver's intentions and control the brakes so that they worked as efficiently as possible more efficiently, while also supporting the anti-skid electronics, ESP, ASER, VA. In the event of a failure of the SBC system, a purely mechanical system was activated, so it's not like you lost your brakes. However, this is an emergency mode, and the system's efficiency is limited in it, and after such a failure you had to go directly to the service, preferably on a tow truck. Due to the weight of the braking system in the vehicle, the SBC management unit had an artificially limited number of activations. This was necessary to reduce the potential risk of failure. Therefore, after the calculated number of brake applications, the unit had to be replaced with a new one. Something like changing the oil after the mileage calculated by the computer, taking into account the type of use. For the first owner of the E-Class, this was usually not a problem, because the car would be put on the secondary market in working order after a few years. Nevertheless, Mercedes, caring about its reputation and at the same time listening to the voice of dissatisfaction of drivers, occasionally introduced discounts of up to 100% for the replacement of the SBC unit, and eventually gave up on this invention. After years, specialist workshops have developed a solution to the problem, which involves switching off the SBC counter, but also frequent system checks. You can also regenerate SBC pumps and reset the control unit number. In practice, the system is quite reliable, and even in the oldest accident-free models that have been serviced, nothing bad happens. It is important to service the brake system in a workshop with an appropriate diagnostic tester and with mechanics who have knowledge of this solution. In cars with SBC, it is very important to change the brake fluid every 2 years, regardless of the result of its inspection, and to charge the 12-volt battery twice a year. The SBC system's proper functioning depends on the battery's condition. One of the serious faults in cars up to 2005 is the ingress of coolant into the automatic transmission oil. This is due to a faulty design that can be modified by installing an external gearbox cooler. Today, this is a rather marginal problem and may only affect models with very low mileage, i.e. very expensive ones. The body of the Mercedes W211 no longer rusts like its predecessors. And if the car has not had any bodywork repairs in its history involving welding, cutting and puttying, it shouldn't look bad. Corrosion blooms appear on the chassis, door edges and rear wheel arches. The hood, front fenders and trunk lid are made of aluminum. Replacing tail light bulbs is quite expensive because the bulb itself cannot be replaced. The entire insert is replaced and costs about $100. That is why many users of older cars are desperately looking for used ones, which are offered at a similar or higher price. Importantly, these are durable elements that are replaced once in a lifetime. The E-Class Mercedes is struggling with electrical and electronic faults in many areas, mainly equipment. However, these are not things that prevent further driving. Unless there is a fault in the ignition module, which will prevent the car from starting. The SAM module often requires replacement. You can buy a used one for a few dozen or a few $100s, depending on the model and seller. Water getting into the trunk is also often responsible for the failure. Thanks for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know any problems with this car that I didn't mention, be sure to write about them in the comments.